Welcome back to the TowerCast Podcast, the towering podcast with the towering filmmaker of El Paso and the world. We have a very special episode today, very awesome guest that I'm really excited to talk about. Before I introduce him, however, I got to introduce my fellow co-host in the room. We have Mr. John Eric Castro.
How you doing, Mr. Ellin? I just want to say congratulations on your 1 year anniversary of victory.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Who would have thought? I didn't even know what a podcast was when the pandemic started.
Oh, dude, last podcast was awesome.
Tell us about it.
We also have Mr. Michael Delao, our fellow cinematography perspective here.
Hello again, everyone. How y'all doing?
And Austin Young, making sure we're sounding great there in the background.
Howdy.
Last but not least,
Yes.
we have the amazing executive producer, writer, director, creator of Entourage, on top of amazing other things that he's done. I love how on the podcast you talk about kissing a fool a lot, and we'll get into a ton of that stuff. But he created one of my favorite things of all time, and I'm shamelessly gonna show like my Entourage gear here because
Oh yeah, for sure.
you have to. We got the gold standard there. Where Castro, it's just Entourage has been one of my favorite shows of all time for the longest time, and I'm so happy to be talking to the creator, the creative mind behind it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And if you listen to the podcast, I talk about my aging hair right now. So Carlos, your fucking hair is amazing, by the way.
Hey,
What the fuck? I mean,
Hey,
Looks
but
like
you
an
got
album.
on Victory. Yeah, you talk about how you went through this amazing process and it's going well, right? To kind of get that.
I haven't seen much yet. Listen, my hair's not that bad, but it's supposedly going to get better. It's never going to look like yours, but
No,
So
none
is
of
the
ours is.
whole- Is the whole Rogaine thing with drama? Is that kind of semi
you
autobiographical?
know what? Not really, because I had great. I didn't have your hair ever, but I had pretty damn good hair back then. No, that was just funny back then. Who would have thought? I think I'm probably suffering because of those jokes. You know.
In some way, the universe got to balance out, right?
And by the way, Kevin Dillon didn't have any problems back then. He used to be like, "Why are we talking about my thinning hair? I don't have thin hair." So he also does not have small calves. So
Right, of course, right. No need for implants for Dylan, but no,
Yeah.
listen. This whole podcast is about filmmakers and how we love the process and how we love everything that cinema has offered, and we want to contribute back to it almost, right? So I really want to kick off your journey as a storyteller. You know, how did your journey as a storyteller? Why did you want to get into storytelling?
Didn't you? My bad. Didn't you start as a comedian?
you know, I didn't start as anything. What
okay.
how things went down is I went to Tulane in New Orleans. I loved movies, television, and comedy growing up. I always said I'm going to be in the movies, but I never did anything about it. And college did not have Tulane didn't have anything to offer in regards to that. So I was just a guy who loved movies and watched movies and television and comedy. But when I graduated, I was supposed to go to law school, and I was waking up every day going, I just can't do this. It's not for me. I'll never make it through. And, you know, I got a father who's a lawyer and a brother who's a lawyer. And no, I didn't know a single person in the entertainment business. So about a month before I graduated, I told my parents, I'm not going to law school. I'm going to LA. And they said, what are you going to do? And the only thing that I knew you could do without anything was do stand-up comedy. It didn't mean you could make money or anything, but so I moved to LA and I started signing up for amateur comedy nights, and I got a job at the New Line Cinema mailroom when they were not even close to what they became. And that's where I started. And then I took a UCLA screenwriting at night, one of those classes you pay like $400 for at night. Yeah. And the first week of the class, the teacher said, everybody pitch a movie idea. And the ideas that people pitched were so bad that I not only thought I could maybe do this, but I also made a short film called The Pitch, where I had a bunch of bad pitches made. Very simple, easy to do. And I got, awesome. I got David Schwimmer before Friends to do that short, and Ernie Hudson from Ghostbusters Oz and a million other things, and Johnny Silverman. And they were all just people I kind of came into contact with in my first year in LA. So I got lucky. And then I was fortunate enough that I sold that film to Showtime, a little 10-minute film. And I also, weirdly enough, a producer saw it and wanted me to direct like a major movie, a $30 million budgeted movie off of this 10-minute short I made.
Right off
And-
the gate.
Dang.
And the short I made was really a writer's piece. It was not a director's piece. It was a one camera angle like we're doing right now. Hopefully it was funny. They thought it was funny. But I went from being in the mailroom at New Line Cinema to 6 months later walking in to the president of New Line Cinema attached to the movie was The Parent Trap with Kevin Pollak and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Wow.
So the people in the office were looking at me like the guy was pushing the mailroom cart around and going, what the fuck is going on here? But then I got in the meeting and Mike DeLuca, who's now an Oscar-winning producer and just a great guy, he had given me money after seeing my stand-up to make this short. So
Whoa.
I was like, I'm 22 and I'm like, holy shit, I made it. Like, I'm going to go direct this movie and I'm going to be Steven Spielberg, you know? And I walked into the meeting and Mike started asking me like, what's my vision for this movie? Which I was like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. I was like, it's going to be funny, you know? The meeting did not go well. I did not walk out with the job. I lost whatever I had. So Mike took me to lunch and said, listen, I believe you got talent and you're going to make it, but go to film school, learn the business, learn a trade. So I went to the American Film Institute, which I used that short film to get me into. And that's it.
Awesome. That's amazing. I mean, it's crazy how, you know, we all kind of went through our journey with film school, what we call film school in El Paso, which is pretty much a digital media program, but it's very organic, do it yourself, make films type of stuff.
That's the key anyway, you know?
Just to get out and do it, right? I mean, absolutely. So you get to film school, and what's that experience like for you? You meet people, because I feel like the benefit of film school is you get to meet other creatives that are wanting to do the same thing you're doing, you know? Yeah,
I mean, the best thing about, I was kind of an outsider at AFI. And I had some good friends in that class and some incredibly talented people. Darren Aronofsky's in my class, Todd Field. Those are 2 Oscar nominees, and Mark Waters and Scott Silver, who wrote 8 Mile and The Joker. So I had a crazy class, but I think I was the only one even attempting to do anything funny. And I wasn't really looked at, I don't think, by anybody as like, you know, the guy to watch for, you know what I mean? But I didn't really like the experience of film school. What I loved was exactly what you guys said. They let you make things. You went out and you made things. And I actually made a film that made fun of the school, and they weren't thrilled about that. And I didn't go back for the second year. I went and made another short film on my own. And after that was done, a producer saw that and called me, and, you know, it wasn't a $30 million movie this time, but I got hired to do my first professional movie, which was called Fat Beach, and the budget was about $100,000
with Coolio. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm surprised you mentioned it too.
By the way, Darren Aronofsky was the second unit director on that. I brought him on that. He won't put that on his resume, believe me. But I'm proud of that movie. I'm actually starting a new podcast with one of the actors who I found 25 years ago, who I find very funny, Brian Hooks. And
I love that.
HollywoodWayz, right? That we need to talk about HollywoodWayz and what that's going to be like. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. But no, I mean, Fat Beach comes along, and then kind of the aforementioned Kissing a Fool, which again, working with Schwimmer again, and kind of on a bigger scale. What was that experience? Yeah,
and again, though, people think that's like a big movie. That movie was $1.6 million, also independently financed. We sold it to Universal Studio. We shot it on location in Chicago in 25 days for $1.6 million all in.
Whoa.
And it was released like it was a giant movie, 2,200 screens and the whole thing. And again, what's interesting about the business and what I learned and that I was able to put into Entourage, 2 weeks before that movie came out, I was being offered $1 million jobs that I was turning down because I didn't want to. I thought I, wanted to do what I wanted to do artistically. Right. The day after the movie came out, I could not get a job, period. I'm talking anything. And I had already made 2 movies that played in theaters, sold 3 screenplays, and I was dead. And I owned a house now and had a kid. And I was thinking about going back to law school, to be honest with you. So,
really?
So it's pretty wild how that can happen. And all of the stuff that I did on Entourage is very realistic to what does happen in this town.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
that's what I think that's what we love about it. Because sure, when you're a filmmaker and you're pursuing what you love to do, you pursue cinema because you love it so much. You go into it with this dreamer mentality, and sure, that's absolutely nice to have to fuel you almost. But you don't realize that all of the walls that come up do exist, and I don't think there's anything better than Entourage that shows, hey, this really happens in this town, and if you're not thick-skinned for all of this, then you're probably not going to make it. And I really do appreciate that about the show, because it's though it's real, it also has heart, and it's obviously funny, but it's real. It's real.
Yeah. And you know, the real of, like, you know, Mark Wahlberg, who was obviously the inspiration for the show, was more of a Vince, but drama was really the real of what most people go through in Hollywood. And by the way, you know, drama was he's not a superstar. He was a successful actor. If you told most people they could have that career, they'd go, okay. But the truth is, that is rejection over and over, and struggling to pay your bills and this and that. So that, which is why the ending of the film is such a big payoff. Entourage. For us that were like rooting for drama, because we love drama, and he's got his quirkiness to him, and half the time, you know, do you believe what drama says because he knows so many people through his journey? But at the same time, you love him, and you root for him because you identify with the rejection. You identify with walking into 10 auditions, and even Castro as an actor, and as a director, you know, myself, it's just like, man, it really is true. You really go through 100 million more no's than yeses, and you got to learn how to accept that. And that was what was important to me for the show. When I first started talking to Mark about it, I'm like, nobody's going to give a shit about your life of everything works out and everything is easy. Now,
the guy who always wins everything. We want to see about, you know, now, that character that grounds back in. Now,
people still, there was some people that was the one criticism of the show. Oh, everything works out. Those people are fucking stupid, and they weren't watching. They weren't watching the show. Like, Vince was really there to try to enable everybody else to succeed. It wasn't about his journey as much as the Entourage journey. So that's why, you know, I think now, which has been very rewarding, because Entourage was nominated for an Emmy and a Golden Globe every year, but when the world started turning, they started turning hard on the show, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, that misogynistic boy fest, and I was like, what the fuck are they talking about? You know, this was the same. You know, this was the same show that Barack Obama said was his favorite show, and LeBron James, and you know, all of this stuff. So I think now during the pandemic, and I think honestly the podcast, people have gotten to see behind the scenes, and they understand it more. And I think people, you know, again, I don't like to say we were underappreciated, because we were nominated for these awards and writers awards and this and that. But I think people forgot that it was a show about friendship and heart more than it was about Hollywood, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hollywood was the backdrop, period. Yeah. But the friendship aspect, I was rewatching the first season today, just to kind of get into that headspace again. Without knowing you were going to be on the show, Doug, you know, I've been bugging you for months, obviously, but without knowing you were going to be on the show, we a few months ago only, we rewatched the show, and we screened the film, and I rewatched the first season today, and almost at least episodes 1 through 5, every final shot of each episode is the guys just hanging out on the beach. The guys just friendship aspect really coming to life. And how that's not communicated to people just really baffles me, because
they look, and a lot of people, I think, remember something differently because they don't really watch it again, and they just talk about things because, you know, we've had on the podcast, we've had all the females on who are just incredible actors who've talked about there were no roles like that for females when we were doing it. And now, as we know, which is great, God bless, the world evolves. And now there are a lot more roles for women where they can play stronger, tougher, cooler, absolutely. You know? Yeah. And that's what happens, you know? And it's also the other thing, you know, look, you guys know the people used to say, where are all the African Americans and where are all the Latinos? And I'd say, go look around fucking Hollywood. I didn't create it. I'm just reflecting what's there.
Absolutely.
And why
the reality.
And why would Entourage look different today? Not because it would be PC, because the world does look different today.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's a good thing, you know?
On a related note, you know, we were talking about recently about In the Heights and how people are complaining because In the Heights didn't have so many. Like, when we're like, hey, like we're Mexican-American filmmakers, Doug, so you have to understand, we're saying, hey, let them succeed. We need them to succeed to break some doors down for us. Don't start canceling already, you know?
You know what? I don't want to weigh into that because I was kind of shocked when I heard it.
Right.
So every group, and by the way, I'm not even sure who's upset, whether there really are Dominicans that are upset or if
it's a whole thing, but we don't have to get into it, but it's a whole thing.
But you know, it is a wild ride to see it. And you know, I think the idea, and me as someone who, you know, over my shoulder, that poster is When the Garden Was Eden was about the civil rights and the NBA, how they came together. You know, when I finished Entourage, I produced The Brick with Spike Lee and Mike Tyson. So inclusivity, not for inclusivity's sake, for stuff that interests me and that I want to show those stories with things that interested me. So, you know, I think
it should never be about pandering. It should be about what does the story call for and what is to tell the story successfully. But yeah, absolutely. But I mean, talking about happier times, right? You come to get Entourage gets picked up. Wahlberg obviously got the push on that. I love what you say on Victory. I don't know if you'd like to repeat it, but I love that on Victory. It was very casual that Mark's like, "Hey, don't fuck this up. You got it. Here you go."
Yeah.
So what was that like? Getting picked up and all that?
I mean, it was amazing. And Mark, I've worked with a lot of stars, and Mark was the best because when he had an opinion, he would give it, but he was really supportive, and he was really the kind of star that gets involved and makes things happen when you need him to. And a lot of these kind of shows or movies where you hear there's a big star behind it, they're not really doing anything. And Mark was great with all of that, but he did allow me to change it to New York instead of Boston, where he's from, to really focus on the relationships that I know more than the relationships he had. So that was great. And we actually have, you know, there's a real E, but he has very little to do with the E on the show. But he's coming in on the podcast Monday because what he does have to do with is he was in that inner circle of Mark, and he was in the first scene in the pilot when Mark is walking down the street, so he can give insights into the real Entourage and how the show was different than the real group, you know. And
I love how you on Victory you talk about these, like, the people that did inspire them, like, you know, Vince and Vince Vaughn, and also the aspects of Ari Emanuel, your former agent, if I'm not mistaken, right? And how that was an inspiration to Ari Gold, and just by the way, one of our favorite characters of the show, period, man. Just
the reason why I got into acting, man.
Piven is just amazing, right?
Piven's unreal. I mean, but you know, that's how things evolve. Luckily, for whatever reason, I love Jeremy from Larry Sanders, and I wanted him to be on the show before I had a pickup, before anything. I wrote him into my first outline, but it was not playing Ari. He was playing a very different guy. And when I met Ari, which the first time I ever met or heard of Ari was at HBO in the pitch meeting. And he was so fucking dynamic and nuts that I was like, okay, this is a character. But even still, Jeremy was reluctant to do it because he didn't know what the role was going to be, because in the pilot, it was a couple of scenes. So things do evolve, and we were lucky that HBO let us do that, you know?
So the first season, obviously, it turns into a massive hit. I mean, throughout, season by season, right? But the first season really did set up the show. Not just the Hollywood backdrop, but the friendship. I mean, the Billy Walsh character, which as a director is one of my favorite characters on the show. And all of the aspects to set up the show really worked well in the first season, and that's very rare. So how did that feel for you as the creator, as the writer for most of the episodes? I mean,
I you know, I'm like a grinder, so I never took the time to say anything but keep going. And obviously, when, you know, we talked about Fat Beach, the Fat Beach was $100,000 movie that came out, and the New York Times basically said, how is this movie in a movie theater? Like, no matter what anyone wants to tell you. And again, it's not like I created Fat Beach and it was some like baby of mine, but it doesn't feel good when you read that, and every person you know on the planet reads that. So when Entourage came out, my big fear was what the New York Times was going to say. And they said we were the best show on TV, and how my brain works, that excitement lasted for all of about 5 minutes. And then I said, well, we better keep making this good.
You're going to look like, right? Yeah.
Because I mean, you create a dynamic that people like once they're introduced and start falling in love with, like, you got to maintain that. And I can imagine that that's just that big kind of worry of like, is it going to keep going? Are we going to keep the same flow? Yeah.
And, things are, what we see, people start getting their own expectations of what they want.
Yeah.
And they no longer care sometimes what you want. So I think, we did different things. I mean, I chose to do different things later in the show, go a little darker, mix it up. And some people didn't react well to that, but I think,
it's the reality. It's the reality of the industry. Yeah.
But I mean, look, a show sets up expectations and you hope you deliver them, and you hope your audience not only loves all of it, but continues to grow. Either way, though, I think now I believe when people look back at the whole thing, they can see there was kind of what I had, which was I really put a lot of myself into this, and every bit of it was as caring as much as anyone could do when they're making something. So some shit works and some doesn't,
And that's fair. I mean, it's capturing. I also think one thing about me, Doug, is I'm a big cinema nut, and I love Hollywood history. And the thing about it is, it is also capturing a moment in time in what the industry looked like, from when the show started to when the show finished. And that's very fascinating to me, because you could look back and say, okay, yeah, at these times they were doing these castings with these types of stories and these types of directors, and the formation of a bigger blockbuster like the Aquaman bit on the show. And it really is capturing a moment in time. It's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's cool to look back on it, but you do have to remember this was a time and a place, and things change. And you can look back. Some of my favorite movies, you look back and you go, whoa, Jesus, that was, but at the time, that's what it was,
Yeah.
So the camaraderie obviously translates across the screen, but I'd love for you to talk about the camaraderie and the chemistry with the cast and your directors and your writers on the show from the whole, we can move on from season 1, but what was that like, and how did that last for 8 seasons? How did that really play on?
Well, my finding that cast was really like finding people who reminded me of the guys I grew up with and who could act, and it was a difficult process. And I think we got them all. And once we put them in a room together, it was then now, okay, you got them. Now you got to give them stories that work because they can do it. And I just had a great cast, which is very, lucky. It's really, the pilot I did after Entourage, the best role on the page I could not cast. And it just, it's imperative that you find the right actors. And I was lucky enough to do that. As far as the writers, I hired my friend from high school, was my first call. And he kind of thinks a little bit. He may not think he thinks like me, but I mean, he knows how I talk, and I know how he talks. And then I was lucky enough to find this woman who was my assistant at first, who then started writing, and she was just amazing. And the directors, we got great. I mean, Mark Mylod, who hadn't done much then, is like one of the biggest directors in television now. Did Succession pilot and Shameless pilot, and does Game of Thrones, and is just a genius. And so we found great people, but we looked really hard. It was not just luck, and we really took our time with finding the people that could work with us. So
sorry, go ahead, guys.
I also saw that, as obviously as an aspiring actor, I saw that you kind of flirted with it. You kind of had some cameos in the Entourage.
Yeah, no one gave a shit. Yeah, I started out. I mean, I said, I wanted to be an actor and a comedian. And after film school, I raised some money to make this short film for myself to star in. And again, David Schwimmer was going to be in it. Right. And it was a short film. And all of a sudden, I got a call from an agency that John Cryer read the script and wants to do it. And I called up Schwimmer, who was at that point, become a good friend. And I said, John Cryer wants to play my role, and he's like, well, I think you should let him do it and go behind the scenes. And the truth is, just like with Piven, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that character that is me. And I used to go why can I type this when I know, honestly, I know exactly how it should sound,
Right.
but could not do what Jeremy does and could not do what John Cryer does. So, you find out what your strengths and your weaknesses are. So I just wasn't, I think there's some place for me in the acting world if I really studied, but it's not doing what Jeremy or John Cryer did or as well as they did it,
Now, as far as the main cast goes, once you have them and you, like you say, you have to develop these interesting stories for each of them. Did you know that you wanted each of these characters to have an arc, a longer arc, or
no? I mean, if you want anything, but the truth is, I think HBO thought we were going to do, which back then was much more in line with television, which is one-offs. It could be a sitcom that anything, you could pick up episode 9 and you don't need to see the first 8.
Right.
The way I started writing, which was not a plan, just the way it started happening. I didn't know how to write a television show. So that's how it happened. And we started getting storylines that were going. So I just continued to try to figure out how to make those work.
Go with the flow. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody, if you're an Entourage fan, you know about the cameos. You know about the amazing cameos that the show had, that the film had. And they weren't just cameos for the sake of cameos. They had something to offer to the show. And then some of these cameos even became their own arcs. Like we talk about Mark Cuban and how he kind of had this really interesting arc in the show with Turtle. And what was that like? Was it a day-by-day thing where, well, we got the season written out, or we got these episodes, how are we going to get these guys? Or was it just
totally day-by-day thing? I mean, Mark and I, we were just talking about it today on the podcast, but I got a call, actually. It's pre-Shark Tank. So Mark's not a giant TV star at this point, and he's never acted. But I got a call from someone in his office that he loves the show and he'd love to be on it. And I just started thinking, what can I do with a guy who's living the ultimate dream? And of course you worry, like, can he act? Is it going to be ridiculous? But when he came on, he was great. So I'm like, he's like, I'll come back anytime you want. I'm like, fuck it, let's come back. Yeah. So, when things like that happen, you get lucky. And I'm trying to think who else kept coming back, but like Gary Busey or
Gary Busey is fantastic.
Yeah. So I don't remember which the other ones were, but
I got to tell you, Doug, you and I have something in common based on your conversations on Victory. And then what I found out what that was that you and I absolutely love and adore Martin Scorsese. And I mean, he's my favorite storyteller of all time. He's just a hero to me. And I know he's a hero to you, especially being from New York. You got him on the show. And this is just amazing.
And that's what I'm saying. Like Mark, I'm like crazy obsessive. And it's like, for whatever reason, there was only one director for Aquaman, James Cameron. And there was only one director for Gatsby. So I knew Mark knew Mr. Scorsese, Marty, whatever you want to call him. So I said, you gotta get him. And he's like, I'll get him. And he got him, And honestly, there were only a couple of times on the set, like where I was like, fuck, we got Martin really? Here doing this. And it was pretty amazing. And then to see those movies actually happen in life is very weird also. So
you have to understand, because you have to understand that as filmmakers, though, some people will see the film and think, oh, hey, Ronda Rousey's on it and how cool. As filmmakers, we're obsessing over you having Jim Cameron, Brett Ratner, Martin Scorsese, all these guys like
Peter Jackson, Gus Van Sant, Aaron Sorkin.
Aaron Sorkin, and he had an arc. Even he was over here talking about Andrew in jail, talking about.
And for me, it's like a lot of people don't. Again, we're talking haters, and I'm only addressing it just to give this point. But people be like, "Oh, they just stick any cameo." No, I stuck on people that I loved, that I admired, that I wished I could make films like. And everyone goes, "Oh, why didn't you make Aquaman yourself?" Or why didn't you make? Because I can't. Because I wouldn't have a fucking clue how to do it. And James Cameron invents underwater cameras. I don't know how to do shit like that. So, but I got to put people on, and I mean athletes too, because I was I'm a decent, slow Jewish athlete, but
pickleball. You got pickleball for you.
I got pickleball, but I idolize those people who make it to the top of their fields and are that great at something. And I like being around them, and I like seeing how they operate. Of course, some people are given natural gifts, but you also see, and I've seen it in a lot of them, the work ethic and the time that they put into that. And when you're watching a Scorsese film,
Right.
this is not slopped together. Every
Yeah.
single thing is planned
frame
and
is
thought
thought.
of, and and the inspirations from him, which again, I hate saying that, like Entourage has anything to do with it, but there were the way I used music on the show, and and even some of the storytelling was my direct love of that type of stuff. So
the needle drops, the oneers, obviously the walk and talks are directly an homage to him.
Yep.
I absolutely love it. Now I have to ask, of all these filmmakers, you must have, obviously as a creator, you post all these awesome pictures on your Instagram anyways of these kind of flashback Fridays or what have you, right? But you talk to these guys, you must have gotten some type of advice or at least been able to conversate with them a little bit. What was that like for you as a filmmaker?
It was amazing. I mean, honestly, sitting with James Cameron, I mean, also part of it is I know my strengths and I know my limitations. And when you're with someone like Cameron,
right,
Peter Jackson, you're like, these guys are on a level that their brains are so unbelievable that, you aspire to do that, but you also go, Avatar's probably not in my future. So what is the right thing for me?
Exactly.
Even though I love that type of stuff. So my stuff is more dialogue driven.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't even want to say character driven. And by the way, I'm not dismissing Cameron's dialogue because True Lies is a great comedy aside from being a great action movie. So I'm just saying
he has a great sense of humor too. It seems like Jim has a great sense of humor.
He's unbelievable. And I've talked about this and there's some articles that came out about it, but Aquaman on Entourage was supposed to be a bomb. And I didn't think about what James Cameron would think about that because it just didn't enter my mind. But then he heard that was the plan and he sent me a letter, which was really amazing. Like, you can't make my movie a bomb. And I changed it because of that. So
Cameron.
Yeah.
I mean, what I love about one of my favorite episodes of the show, I really love this episode, is the Valley episode where the blackouts happen, right?
Yeah.
One day in the Valley. And you talk about the numbers, right? The numbers of you want to beat Spidey and you want to beat Titanic. And it's Titanic. It's James Cameron's Titanic. And they had a back and forth, right? Like Avatar and the Marvel Cinematic Universe had a back and forth with all that in the Avengers. But how could you, right? With Jim, you just can't. You just can't.
But it also, he doesn't fail. He just doesn't. Yeah. So it's actually not even good storytelling when I talk about how I'm going to be realistic.
Right.
It's not, because he doesn't have that big bomb in his arsenal. It's never happened, And
he must have loved it though, right? Because you had him for various episodes. You shot a couple scenes at Lightstorm. I mean, you must have loved it enough to want to come back so many times, right?
I mean, look, you'd have to ask him. He was awesome, and everything about having him around there, which started with, the rumors about James Cameron is like, he's tough on a set. He's difficult. Right. And when I got him, Janice Tashjian, who was our post-production supervisor, who worked on the Jessica Alba show. I forget the name of it, Dark Angel or something. I don't know. But she's the one who presented it to him after I wrote it in the script, which she's like, why are you writing him in? And I'm like, just try. And she got him. Right. But still, she was like, listen, you don't because Entourage was a very loose set. I'd have friends around and it was just like, she's like, you don't fuck around with him. Like, he's a serious guy. And when I got to the set the first day, the AD comes running over at 6 a.m. and says, Cameron's going nuts. He doesn't like the script. I'm like, I sent him the script 3 weeks ago, and I get to the set and he's like yelling, and I'm literally in a panic, freaking out. And I'm like, Mr. Cameron, what's the problem? And he tried to play it off, but he was joking. So he was pulling this prank on me. But so I think he really enjoyed being on a set where he didn't have any responsibilities, because that's the thing, which I'll say it, you're an aspiring actor. Actors, for the most part, are real fucking assholes. I mean, they just they think, and I get it. Yeah. The star is really a major key to the movie, but it's still the easiest job on the set. Not to necessarily be great, but you need that talent. But no matter how good you are, you're putting less fucking work in than the gaffer and the director of photography and everybody else. So I think that's something that Castro's learned on the sets, because now he sees and he's like, what can I help out with? As indie filmmakers, we have to wear different hats. And Castro's always on set, and he gets there on set and ready to work. But he's like, hey,
let me help you set up this light. Let me
I'm
help.
one of those actors that they'll tell me, no, you don't have to help
Yeah,
out.
go sit, you know.
It's just I'm so amazed at what they do. No,
Well,
for sure.
you'll see when you're on a union set, you're not even allowed to do that stuff.
Yeah,
but the fact that your brain would even operate to think that way is a good thing, because a lot of actors come on the set and just want to be treated like they're the kings when they're already getting paid more money than most of the people who are there, working harder than them, getting no credit for it. So it is, to me, it's a really important thing for everybody on a film. And I say this all the time. It's like, I wish I could paint or play the guitar and make an album, because then I wouldn't need all the people that I need. But the fact is, to make a movie, even if you're James Cameron or Martin Scorsese, you need amazing people around you, and you should think about how important everybody is and not think about how important you are, you know?
Yeah, that is perfect.
And so on the show, you're living out kind of your creative dream to a certain degree, but you also get to write and direct for this show. Did that mean more to you as an aspiring filmmaker, right? Before you got Entourage, was that something like, because I know Connolly directed some episodes too, and you got some obviously.
I mean, what was frustrating to me, and again, you know, everybody knows I was on set and dealing with the directors at all times, but I would have liked to be able to direct more, but the writing process is so all consuming for me.
Yeah.
While the directing process is really the fun part. Like the writing process is almost torture to me. I overthink things. I details, very small details I obsess over, which most people wouldn't give a shit about. Other details I don't care about, like whether Vince and Drama have the same father or mother. It doesn't make a difference to me. But there are other details of logic that when they don't add up to me, I you know, especially like that One Day in the Valley episode that you talk about, which I watch it now and it looks so simple, but the amount of, I threw out a full draft of that script and said, you know, the writers all got pissed at me. I said, this is fucking not working. We have to change everything. And it was just little things that seem so simple when you look at it now, but trying to figure out a structure of a half hour where you could believably think that this hit movie might not look like a hit movie because of electronic errors was very complicated in my mind anyway. So
but for something like Entourage, do you have a writer's room, or is it just you and Ali, or is it just you and Rob, or just, you know, do you have an actual writer's room? Or
we had a writer's room for a few seasons. The last couple of seasons, for the most part, it was Ali and I, but even in the writer's room, I have a hard time in the writer's process. I'm so collaborative and everything else, and I'm collaborative with the writers too, but I have a hard time breaking a story with a group of people. So I used to start typing shit and then bring it in, and then we'd start talking about things. It was not the most efficient way to do it. There are really, great, I've been in rooms with people, great showrunners who know how to go, you break the first act, you do this. My brain doesn't work that way. So
it's like, I got the story. Let me just push it out.
I don't think I could do that either. I mean, mind you, like TV is it has its own process from film. They are very different in their writing processes. But I don't know that I could do that either. I respect that a lot, because that's probably why the show feels so cohesive. Where in other shows, like every season feels different, but not for Entourage.
Hopefully it feels. I hope my voice, for better or worse, comes out in everything that happens on the show.
Right.
But
absolutely,
there are ways to make it more enjoyable, and the reason I'm not overly excited or haven't been ever to run another show is it was 24/7 for me. It was really like, you know, and again, it is a lot of times that way for people on other shows that people don't even like. A lot of effort goes into this stuff to try to churn out a half hour of anything that makes any semblance of sense. So
you weren't just a creator or an EP in name only. You were there. You were a showrunner.
I was really, as I said with one of the characters, I was 24/7, and I
24/7 Scotty, huh?
Yeah, I lived and breathed this stuff, you know.
I love that.
So you have this amazing experience, this plethora of collections of stories and cameos. You must have had a time of your life where you really loved it more than any other. Was there a particular season that you really loved in particular, or was it?
Well, the later seasons, not about content, but again, when I would get scripts done
Yeah.
The set was fun to me. That was like a party. That was like, let's go make shit happen. When scripts weren't done, it was never enjoyable for me. So, and it was really, my life was split into like the time of getting scripts done and then enjoying life when they were done. So,
Yeah.
And as any other writer, as any other creative, right, you go through these moments in your life that end up inspiring, what you're writing and what you're making. And I mean, even your boy, he makes an appearance on the show and ends up having his own little arc to a certain degree, playing Ari's son, and getting that whole thing involved. I mean, you have to kind of enjoy life so that you can almost include it in your art to a certain degree, right? I feel like that must have been true with you.
Or not enjoy life. I mean, movies and TV, storytelling is conflict. And
yeah,
I used a lot of conflicts in my real life on the show. I use a lot of conflicts in the real life on the podcast we do, which, the podcast on a certain level, which is why I love doing this so much, is performance. I mean, we are who we are, but we put on a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And when we're pissed at each other, we turn it into comedy, even though we're really pissed at each other.
We were just talking about that, Castro and I. We were just talking about how the conversational aspect is very fun, but the fact the banter is almost just makes the podcast just so much more enjoyable.
I mean, that's what that's what I want to do with them, and that's what they're capable of. And I say it. I mean, the truth is, like, I would, if we had more time, I would edit the podcast like a show where the dialogue it doesn't have a missed space, but we're getting closer by the day to do it live, So and
so
it's
much
wild.
So much so that everybody, you've been saying this on the show so much that everybody has been asking, myself included, by the way, for the video element.
Yeah, I know.
When can we get the
Kevin
video?
Connolly thing? The weird thing about this podcast is, it was my show and I was the boss. And then this thing, Kevin Connolly comes up with how to take my show and respin it. And now I got to listen to his shit, which, I love him. I love him like a brother, but I'm not used to having a fucking guy tell me how to do this type of stuff. So it makes for some interesting stuff, but it also gives us good conflict,
And kudos to the quote unquote, as you guys put it, the businessman, right? But because Action Park is really blown up, they're doing a ton of stuff. But I'd like to think that Victory is really enjoyable, especially for somebody who loves the show. And what's cool is you mix it up. You get guys who've never been even been part of the show just to chat and talk about sports or film, and it's mixed.
Well, that was the thing where we started. When Connolly said it, I said, I'm not doing an Entourage podcast.
Right.
I didn't think I would enjoy that part as much as I have, but I said, let's mix everything. And some people complain about that, but I love it. We've had football players on and basketball players on and the Wolf of Wall Street, since we're talking Scorsese,
Jordan Belfort was on the show. Yeah.
So, and I love that. And Mark Cuban, even though he was on the show, I wanted to talk to him about crypto.
We're talking to him about Luca and the new acquiring Jason Kidd as a coach. And
Yep. So I mean, and what I didn't realize when I look back at it now, stand-up comedy was not my thing, but radio might have been. And I wish 30 years ago I thought about that, because I actually do love this,
Definitely have the voice for it.
You also had the Roastmaster General on the show talking about comedy.
Oh man, Jeff Ross, man.
Jeff Ross was on there, and he was an amazing guest on the show.
You have to have thick skin with him, though, right?
You know what? I mean, he was
kind, though.
He was pretty kind to me, because he did my birthday party a few years ago, and he was less kind then. But I legitimately love Jeff Ross. He is one of the quickest, funniest people, and he's a guy, obviously, if the show was on now, he would be on. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a precursor to the podcast, right? You do the film, and as a film, it's very enjoyable, right? But sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, well, how did you know, or how was that final season in Entourage? How did you feel that, or were you pressured into ending it, or did you want to end it?
I mean, HBO ended it. I mean, I didn't. I mean. Again, I don't want to say, because part of me was like relieved while I wasn't. But
But you were willing to go another season.
We'd still be going if they kept saying, "Hey, go another season." I would have never said I'm not doing this. But part of me was done. And the movie, I didn't really want to do the movie, and Mark convinced me to do it, and it was a great experience. Actually, we had a great time. It didn't. You
directed it. You directed the film.
I directed the film. Yeah, I mean that was I had time to finish the script, so there was no reason I wouldn't direct the film. It didn't. The Me Too movement was not quite here yet, but it was. And that's really, when you look back at the reviews of the movie, and I have the test scores of the movie here. Like, Entourage fans love the fucking movie. Absolutely. And the critics just torched us in a way, which whatever it is, it is what it is. And Stuart Rosenberg was my teacher at AFI, and he's, cool hand Luke, and just a brilliant guy. And he said, look, the reality is you don't travel with your films. You put it out and that's it. The world will decide. And at that moment, the world decided that wasn't the movie for them. So, you move on.
You move on, and what I love about what you say on Victory the podcast is, and by the way, if you're listening to this, you need to go check out Victory the podcast, especially
Mark Cuban next.
It's interesting how meta it is. It's the behind the scenes of the behind the scenes. I mean, if Entourage was a behind the scenes of Hollywood, but, Victory the podcast is a behind the scenes of how this was made, and how
it's really so weird because we just did our 1 year anniversary, and I'm looking at these clips. And it feels like almost like a scripted show. Yeah. It's so weird to me. And, Dylan and Connolly, they're fucking funny, and they were
really are. Pivens with Tyson, doing Tyson's voice.
and Piven calling in with Tyson was wild, and those are the types of things that used to happen, though. I'd get a call of LeBron James wants to be on the show, and I'd scramble to figure it out. Next thing you know, he's flying in on a private jet. We're shooting a scene on a runway. Matt Damon's there. And we kind of got the same vibe with the podcast, and things are happening, and
by the way, the Matt Damon stuff on Entourage has to be one of my favorite. Good Will Hunting is literally my favorite film of all time. So to have Matt Damon on there being funny is just like Jason Bourne me. Like, it's just hilarious.
And Good Will Hunting, which Gus Van Sant directed.
Yes, Gus was on the show. Yeah.
But Good Will Hunting, Swingers, Diner, those were such inspirations for me because forgetting the storyline of Good Will Hunting, of the genius and all that.
No, but the dialogue and the chemistry with the friendship.
These boys from working class neighborhoods who just stick together no matter what. Those were the things that inspired me,
Absolutely. I mean, I think Victory is fantastic in that sense. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface. You guys have a lot to talk about, a lot more guests.
We'll see. Hopefully. So,
but not to mention HollywoodWayz, right? This is a new thing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that's going to be about?
So I'm working on it. Okay. So we're going to figure it out. I'm hoping I may do it with this great young actor named Breezy, who's on All American. Okay. I don't know if you've seen it, and she's a rapper and she's awesome. And then Brian Hooks from Fat Beach, but we'll see. It's going to launch in the next few weeks. The beauty of a podcast is you can just do it. And if 5 people listen or 5 million listen, you can keep honing it. And I believe, like filmmaking, this is a craft, and I've been doing it for a year. I'm just getting started, so I'm really enjoying it. But that's the plan right now, where I want to bring the real ultimate, like, inside guide of Hollywood from someone who's a little older now, and bring in some younger, edgier thing. And I also do, without pandering, like we said, I want it to be this inclusive group that can speak to a lot of audiences and hopefully bring them all together somehow. Since it seems like
is this also launching on Action Park, or is this your separate thing?
Well, my brother owns Podcast One, weirdly enough, so I'm probably going to do it there. We'll see.
Gotcha. Well, hey, if you need some voices, some filmmakers on your HollywoodWayz, you got us, Doug. You just need to let me know.
Appreciate it. And some Mexican Americans, even though I married and divorced one of you.
Yeah, we are kind of crazy. The Latinos are kind of crazy.
She wasn't even crazy. She was nice. I'm probably the crazy one, but
that's absolutely. You really have created, through Entourage and all of the work you've done, something really special that we care about, not just as filmmakers, but as general. There's more general audience members watching Entourage than there are filmmakers or TV creatives or what have you. So I think that when you get somebody like us who love the process and love. We live, breathe cinema. Something like Entourage speaks to us more than anybody else, I would argue.
Yeah.
So I think that's really special.
Thank you.
You've talked about on Victory, before we kind of transition into our last segment here. You talk about on Victory how when you started, you were dead on saying there isn't going to be. I know you get this question all the time, Doug, and I'm sorry for it, but our listeners are going to want to hear.
Yeah.
You talk about how when you started Victory, the podcast, you were dead on. I'm not doing a reboot. I'm not doing another film. I'm not doing a film, another season, nothing. And then you mentioned that the more you did the podcast, the more fun you were having with these guys again. You were revisiting a lot of stories. Yeah. And like you say, Dylan and Connolly, it's a blast to work with.
Yeah.
And obviously, I know you've had Jerry on the show and Piven and stuff. What do we expect from the Entourage lineage?
Well, listen, obviously HBO, that's an HBO question.
Right.
Oh, then it might have been me and HBO. And now, it's not easy to find a group like this. So if they wanted to do it, I'm not going to say no at this point. And so, I've definitely come a long way from a year ago. I just have really liked getting back into this. I have really liked interacting with the fans and stuff. It's been a lot of fun and rewarding because, you're trying to, in my opinion, this podcast was sort of like to restore our legacy because suddenly it was kind of turned into a way that I don't get. And hopefully we're not vulgar, we're not disgusting, but we're still funny. And that's the idea. So,
and you're very well, that you're bringing in voices that, like you said, you had Constance and you had Perry and you had all these voices that can attest to the fact that this was an amazing experience for them.
Yeah.
We recently had
Danya
Ramirez. Yeah. And she was saying how this was a very big step for her and her bump into her career. I mean, it's terrific. And I think people, they really can't say anything else, though they will. They'll find a way. It doesn't matter.
What I've realized now is it's a small group of people that speaks really loudly on Twitter and other places. Yeah. And if it's not that you should ignore criticisms, you take them in and you ingest them, and we all want to improve in life, in our work and everything else. But I don't apologize for anything I've done. And I feel like, there's more to come. So
there's an immediacy about it. Like I was watching the first season today, and even the review episode of Vince, he says a very key line: positive or negative, you can't let these things get to you. And how much more relevant is that today? The immediacy of print media versus social media now. We hear those things a lot faster now, right? Even as filmmakers, people are going to watch our films and see, criticize almost immediately. But I don't think I think the fact that you as a filmmaker, as a creative, you either let it affect you or you don't. That's kind of on you. You got
to, like I said, the New York Times, when they said we were the best show on television, we probably weren't. And when somebody else said we're the worst show ever made, we definitely weren't, So it's, you gotta take it for what it is.
Exactly.
Like you said, you keep growing with the times. Oh, shoot.
I hate to do this because, man, I just want to
one fucking time I talk.
Yeah, go for it.
No. Well, now I'm tired of it. No. I was just saying that, like you were talking about earlier, just you're growing with the times. It's not something that, you're always focusing on, like what you did back then is who you are now, because it's always adapting, it's changing. I mean,
and it is, like
talk about that. Yeah,
like there are words that we said on Entourage. I just wouldn't say them today that they weren't meant offensively, and
they didn't have that kind of like tone to them. Which now,
and that's, I think, an important thing. Intent, and you guys know, as Mexicans, groups tend to grow together. And I grew up in a town that was Jewish, Italian, and Irish, and all the stereotypes. Yeah. I know what my Italian friends say about the Jewish guys, and I know what the Irish guys say and what the Jewish guys say about the Italians. That used to be funny.
Yeah.
I do get now a different world where I do think it's better, where you don't need to play into those stereotypes, because what it does do, and while it may not do that to the groups that have moved up in the place, like Italian Americans now, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, that was a real minority that people looked at like, this is no good. This is no good. And as we know, you guys have dealing with, which I don't know if you were, fans of Trump's or not, but when you do take the minority group and you do stereotype them in ways, there are a lot of people that take that for real, especially if they don't interact with those people. So that's why I do think it's important to think about that shit. And that doesn't mean you can't be funny.
You have to. You have to. I mean, a lot of comedians are going about saying, I'm not going to apologize for joking. Joking is one thing, right? And Jeff actually talked about it on your show. And that's one thing. But as a Mexican American, I could tell you, yes, we've been called every name. We're on the border city. If you don't know, we're literally El Paso's right.
Yeah, I know.
I
know.
So we've been called every name under the sun when it comes to derogatory.
Yeah, and again, like I say, you guys can choose to wipe it off your back, but the fact of the matter is, when people in power are saying shit like that, it's having real life effects. And listen, I see it now. Jews, who a lot of people like to look at as we own the universe, which is fucking idiotic, but we see now that there's this. Oh, let's turn on the Jews now. Let's turn on the Asians this week. It's important that everybody comes together while still being able to make art that reflects what real life is. Like, are you going to say, like Goodfellas? I grew up in the area of Goodfellas, and that's how a lot of people spoke. So when you make a movie about that time and place, and if it's going on today you still want to be real to what is real. But at the same time, if you don't have any necessary reason to just kind of play into those stereotypes, to me, it's better. And guys who adapt and advance, and we'll see how I do. But Dave Chappelle is able to walk those lines and brilliantly do it, where he is able to send a message while still being hilariously funny, you know?
We have to keep asking ourselves what Joe Pesci always says, right? Funny how? Funny how? That's how it goes.
Yep, intent is important.
We know you got Game 7 to get to, so
let's go Islanders. Let's go.
We got a final segment for you here.
Yeah, the last segment is where we like to put our guest in the hot seat. All right, it's one of those good word of the days with De La O.
I'm with you.
Word of the day. Word of the day. We got a word of the day segment. I mean, you're a writer. We're creatives. We like communicating ideas in whatever way that might be. And I want to just shoot out a word to you and see if you understand the meaning. That's all it is, basically.
There's something to this, okay? Just,
Yeah. So your word, if you know it, do you know it? It's inveigle.
You're going to make me look really fucking stupid.
No. I'm telling you, there's something to
this. That's the plan.
Don't worry about it.
Inveigle?
Yeah, inveigle.
I've never heard this word.
Yeah, me neither.
All right.
Come on, man.
No guess. Perfect. Then I've done my job. Okay. So to inveigle is to entice. And the reason I chose this word for this podcast is because we're talking about Entourage. We're talking about groups coming together, being enticed, wrangled together through, I feel like it's this art of storytelling, but then like you talk about, it's friendship, how that grows. And it's something that speaks volumes where, I mean, all of us love it for the Hollywood aspect of how everything's all interconnected together. But I mean, it's the friendship, it's the camaraderie that we have now that, I mean, we're seeing when we watch Entourage, and we're still enjoying, and we're able to keep coming together because the show kind of spoke volumes about that, even though, it's not here right now. So yeah,
I like
word
it.
of the day. There you go.
Guys, we've had the amazing, the incomparable Doug Ellin. Like I said, he's done it all. Executive producer, creator, writer, director for Entourage, both the film, the TV show, and the podcast. Just how much involvement he has in that. It's amazing. Go check out Victory, the podcast, and be on the lookout for HollywoodWayz. There's already an Instagram. It's called Doug Ellin's HollywoodWayz. You can just follow HollywoodWayz on Instagram. With a Z. That's right. Yeah. Make sure to check that out. It's going to be, I mean, the stories that Doug has to impart, I bet you it's only a fraction that he's told on Entourage, on Victory, the podcast, rather. And it's going to be amazing. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to go rewatch Entourage and look at it with a different view, because the world is changing. And when you look back at this, especially as a creative, you realize just, I speak for myself only. I learned so much about the industry as a filmmaker through Entourage. And that's one of the biggest things I took away from it is, this is how this works. This is how dailies work. This is how scripts are turned, how many drafts, and how to cast this person or that person. So that's invaluable to me. And Doug, I thank you for that. So thank you for being on TowerCast.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, guys. Be good.
Make sure to listen to this on all major podcasting platforms, guys. Catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Take care.